All right, Lonesome Lance podcast. I am here with Sarah the Sheep Lady, as I've known her for years, and I can tell you how I like Instagram's. I was gonna look up how long Instagram's been on. Do you know how long you've been on there?
Inception, probably. I don't
Yeah,
know. A long time.
which I don't even. But yeah, now that you go, it's been so many years. It's like you feel like you know people because you've seen what they're up to for years. And I can almost remember like there was one of your posts, like when I first got on Instagram, start following ranch people, and a lot of them are women because the guys aren't on there. But I have another business where I sell different artwork and stuff, and so I got on there, and I remember showing my wife like. Look at this lady, and you were chasing a horse. There was a horse run down a road ditch, and you were screaming out the window at it.
Bob. I was yelling at Bob. Yeah,
And I
remember
was
that.
just like, this is so funny. I showed my wife, I don't think she'd ever chased a horse. Like, you have to have that perspective of it's pretty much just a futile exercise. And all you can do is yell at them. So, but that was pretty
Exactly.
funny. So
Yeah.
you have given me, I guess, years of entertainment. I feel like you're one of the very entertaining accounts on Instagram. Um, and so I want to talk to you, and you also sell beef direct and lamb, I'm assuming, right? And you're both out of, I guess I'll let you kind of explain where you're at, I guess.
Yeah. Do you want to explain the history of our ranch
I guess
since
I should say
Sure.
you're the
Sarah
beginner?
and Henry Hollenbeck, right?
Yep.
Yes, yes. So I married into the Hollenbeck Ranch. I'm originally from California, which is a bad word. Uh, and he still gets crap for it to this day, but I'm here to stay, unfortunately, for anyone that has a problem with that. But no, we are in Molt, Montana, which is very centrally located in the state. We've got two great kids. They're 6 and 7 years old, and we have, needless to say, a lot going on. One of the most common questions we get is, how do you guys do it all? And we don't even ask ourselves that. We just keep doing it, and then we take on more and more, and until something doesn't work, then we pivot. But primarily, we are a sheep operation. We have, dependent on the year, around 25 to 3,000 ewes that we lamb out every year. And then in addition, in the last few years, Henry's really ramped up our feeding of light lambs to fats operation. And he can kind of dive more into that and how that became what it is now. But that's, I'd say, the bread and butter of what we do. But we also do a lot of feeder goats. We also do a lot of cattle, primarily yearlings, fats. Henry just did a bunch of cull cows, feeding out some cull cows. We're not a traditional cow calf operation by any means. We kind of like to try all the other things before that. We have had cow calves. We do have a few, but it's not our main shtick. Um, Goats, I don't know if I mentioned those yet. Henry's been feeding a lot of goats the last couple of years, primarily all going to the ethnic market on the East Coast, West Coast, and some down to Colorado. We have some horses, do some rodeo training, some ranch horse training. And then off of that, we have meat sales. I started High Five Meats, a direct to consumer buying company, in 2015, which is crazy. I think it's been 10 years. That's provided a lot of opportunity within meat sales. And then in 2020, our family purchased a processing plant in Forsyth, which is about an hour and a half from Billings. Henry's brother is currently running and managing that, and that's been a learning experience all on its own, having a mid-sized processing plant. And then we also have order buying business. Mike and Henry, it's called Arrow Livestock. They buy a lot of animals, buy and sell a lot of animals, trade a lot of animals. And then we just recently started a consulting business called Arrow Consulting because of all the things we do, we get asked a lot of questions and opinions, and from that we thought, how can we better help people? Well, we should probably make a business out of it. So that's been really interesting to get started into as well. With the sheep business, we do utilize the H2A labor program. We've got about 6 guys from Peru. We couldn't do it without them, and they're great. It's hard to find people that want to work in agriculture, let alone live in Molt, Montana. and work with sheep. That's also a very specialized thing. I mean, I've seen some cattle guys try to work sheep before and it's not cute. So it's good that we have them. We couldn't do without them.
Yeah. So that's okay. We're all out of time. I was like, that was quite a rundown. I can't. Yeah, I'm sure you do get questions of how you. I mean, that's the main question. How do you do it all? But I guess to kind of go back, I guess you said to stay with you for a little bit or for a minute. You said you're from California. How
Yeah.
did you end up finding a Montana
Our
cowboy?
our love story.
So everybody asks, you're just like everybody
And
else.
especially, yeah.
He likes
Well,
to tell me,
it's an interesting. It's
yeah. I'm still shocked. Knowing him now, I'm still shocked that he pursued it just based on my location alone. But um yeah, my sister met him at a sheep conference in Scottsdale, Arizona. And as you can imagine, there's not a lot of young people in the sheep industry. So this was 14 years ago, and I get, some after conference hours messages of, oh my gosh, I met this guy from Montana. I think you'd really like him. And I'm like, okay, there's got to be like two younger single people there. And I'm like, great. And then somehow he got my phone number. And so I just became this like, who's this random sheep rancher from Montana? But everything I kept hearing was he was this great guy and I should give it a shot. So after about chatting for 6 months or so, I finally flew out to Montana. I didn't tell a soul except for my mom and my sister. And I told my work at the time I was going to my cousin's wedding because I couldn't bear to say, I'm going to go meet this random sheep rancher from Molt, Montana who I've never met before. And I'm hoping he doesn't murder me and bury me on the ranch somewhere. So it worked out. And here we are, 14 years later and two kids later. And
wow. So where at in California?
I grew up in a little town called Grass Valley. It's an hour north of Sacramento. I
Yeah.
went to college at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. Go Mustangs. And yeah, I worked in Central Valley primarily in the nut tree, fruit tree, and grapevine industry, actually, and then moved to Montana and realized that none of those crops can grow there very well, if at all. So it was a big change. I mean, I grew up in agriculture. I was
Yeah.
comfortable, but I wasn't ever in a situation where I was on a commercial sheep ranch with thousands of animals. So it was a learning curve, but it was definitely one I was interested in learning. So that first year on the ranch, I just put my head down and was like, okay, I just gotta figure out how it works. He didn't want me, he didn't want to propose to me until I lived through a Montana winter and a lambing season. And there was tears through both of those seasons, but I
Yeah.
did through. So
Yeah. And afterwards you probably realized, oh yeah, that's was a good thinking, right? How many
my mom,
gals would stick around?
my mom was like, Henry, my daughter's moving all the way out there. You need to make her some promises. And he's like, no, she literally has to show me that she can survive out here. Close to her. And I mean, anyone that's lived through Montana winters, they know it's rough. And anyone that I've ever met that's like, oh, I'd love to live in Montana, but I can never do the snow. I'm like, well, you know that off the bat, then you really won't.
Hmm. Yeah. And so Henry, I guess it sounds like your family's been there a while.
Yeah. Um, We moved on to that ranch when we were when I was about 5 years old, so
Hmm. And your
35.
fam they've been ranching in the area then?
My dad, he originated out of South Dakota, Edgemont, South Dakota, and then we moved up there and out there on the ranch. We worked for the ranch for like 10 years. And then they wanted us to lease the ranch from them. So we bought all the livestock, or my dad did, and leased the ranch. Then they sold it out from underneath of us. We had to go to a neighboring ranch, and we actually uh, bought that one, and we were on there 3 years. And in those 3 years, kind of built that up. And my dad, or the ranch that we were on that we got sold out from underneath it, come back up for sale. So he sold the one that we were on and bought that one back the second time. So we've
Hmm.
pretty much been on there all but 3 years in the last 35 years, I guess. So,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
then we just been steadily growing ever since. And we
Yeah.
own an elevator too that we lease out to pulse crops, and I feed a lot of screenings and stuff out of the elevator. And
Okay.
then we got the packing plant. Yeah,
Keep
it's a
adding
lot.
on, huh?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I guess did you raise sheep then when you were growing up?
Yeah, we had like a deal of 300 or so when we were growing up. We always just had like 300 ewes type deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the transition deal, we kind of got out of the sheep, and my dad was into cattle way more. And then when I come home from college, it kind of all got started with the video auctions. I started selling lambs on the Northern Livestock video and kind of got my foot in the door there. And then when I first come home from college, though, I was a truck driver and sat behind that wheel and crunched numbers and
Mm-hmm.
ways that a guy could possibly make money than driving a truck. But I got to see a lot and got to know that industry, and I can't say one bad thing about it, and got to experience a lot.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, and didn't the first band kind of come from the Texas drought?
Yeah, that was kind of into it, but once I finally decided to get out of the trucks, I sold the truck and I bought my first 300 U's. And then in 5 years, I was up to 50% with my dad. He had 50% and I had
Mm-hmm.
50%. It just kind of grew from there.
Yeah.
And I doubled them each year to get it. It took me 4 years to get 50%, I think it was.
Hmm.
And then we just kind of grew into 50% partners and everything and made land payments together and built a good bond and a good working relationship. And I have to say, like, a lot of our success comes from an open-minded father.
Yeah.
Wasn't set on one way, always thinking outside the box. I mean, a lot of our success has come from being raised the way we were, thinking outside the box and trying something different and minimizing your risk. And
He's
we,
never short of a new idea.
yeah, he's never, I mean, you got to be careful going to him with a new idea. You better
You'll get
be,
too excited.
We'll
yeah,
scale.
yeah. Say you want to spend 100,000 and he'll spend 500, if we're
Yeah.
going to do it big. So
Mm-hmm.
you got to, but, we've had a lot of stuff not work too. And that's why we're still in it, because we've learned from lessons that we've had. So
Mm-hmm.
good and bad.
Does it take like Sarah said, most people don't like realize. My brother has like a handful of sheep, and one time I was back there I've never messed with him much. He trains border
Oh,
collies, um, and does trials and all that stuff. So he likes to start them on sheep before he moves to cows, and so he's always got a handful around. And one year he had a bunch, and this is my thinking of my experience with sheep. He said, just if you need to move them over this pen, get behind them with your dog, which my dog but he's like, if they see a dog, they'll kind of look for a gate, And so they all run for this gate, and there was like a 1 foot opening maybe on the side of that gate, and they all shot right through. There was a wide open
mm.
gate, and they all went for the one, about 12 inches, about 12-inch opening, and they all just smashed into that, and then they kind of went around the gate. But it was kind of like, boy, that's that's
Well,
something.
and a big thing with working sheep versus cattle is, like, sheep, you always walk through them and then they wheel around you, when you're
Mhm.
moving big bunches of them. Well, cattle, you got to be real careful about doing that.
Yeah,
And so that's where it kind of moves back and forth.
yeah, yeah. So you must enjoy it though,
Yeah, I mean, for sure we do, but it's all money too. I mean,
right?
money all talks. I mean, so it's
Everything's for
just,
sale at Hollenbeck Ranch.
yeah, like,
Hmm.
that was one thing that Sarah had a hard time with. Like, I tell her all the time, I'm like, don't name stuff because you're going to be heartbroken when it has a name and it leaves. So,
Or dies.
yeah, or dies. So
That's the
quit,
big one.
Is
quit.
it too soon to bring up the goat?
No,
Do you ever?
I still haven't mourned him properly, and he
Okay.
died 5 years ago. No, that goat was funny because he tells me not to get attached and not to name things, and then he brings home this most adorable, tame, follows you around goat and is like, "Here's your 1 year wedding anniversary gift that was
Oh,
five
I
dollars.
didn't know all that.
$5 at Pay's auction yard." And I'm
Well,
like,
I'm newly married. I'm not the most romantic Like,
That's his dozen roses is a
and
good
I'm
bow.
like, what in the hell am I gonna do for a 1 year anniversary? You know, everybody oohs and ahs over 1 year anniversary, and I'm like, I have no idea. So I'm at the sheep sale, and here this goat comes in for $5. This little brown goat. I'm like, hey, I got a winner here.
A weather, mind you.
Yeah.
A
And
weather.
so I buy this goat. She's like, she was being prissy with me. Where's my wedding anniversary present? I'm like, well, it's on that trailer. And here's a whole trailer load of sheep, and here comes this one little goat running off of there.
I just love it for. And then he became a focal point of my social media for years to come.
So, what rancher gets away with a $5 present on their first year
Yeah, there
anniversary?
you go.
Only me.
Yeah, it
No doubt,
became
no pearls, goat. Hey, I was happy as a clam.
well, there
I'd
you
take I'd take a goat every year on our anniversary.
go.
But I took serious. That was bad when he died. That was sad.
But I
Yeah.
mean, that's to be honest with you, a lot of part of our success was her social media
From that damn goat.
and coming, but like leading back to bringing a Californian out, like I had everything going and moving and grooving and stuff. And here I got this wife in the background kind of taking videos and like making it all real to people back in California. And that's when we realized we had something because I was oblivious of what we were doing and how unique it was.
Hmm.
But bringing her into the picture, you know, she's painting this picture of an outsider of everything that we do for everybody back in California and explaining what ranching is all about and where your food comes from. And so 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I mean, that's how it kind of got started by bringing an outsider in that didn't really know the realm and she
Hmm.
was willing to learn and it just kind of it
Yeah.
built on itself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
he'd
you
give
got
me look at me funny
Oh,
with some of the
all the
stuff I
time.
did. But
I was gonna
then
say.
on the road and people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe the stuff your wife posts. So funny," or "That's so interesting," or "Oh my gosh, I learned something I never knew about." And he's like, "Damn it."
Well, you go to rodeos and stuff, and everybody knows the Hollenbeck name, and there's people coming up. Oh, I know your wife. I still get it to this day as I'm rodeoing. I go all over the state or even the United States, and people are like, "Yeah, I know your wife." I'm like, "Okay, doesn't surprise me."
Yeah. And they know the goat probably too, right? So for people who might not follow, but the goat got dressed up. The one I remember is Elsa during like Frozen, the height of Frozen. You put
Yeah.
That was
dresses
back when
on.
that website Vine was really popular too. It's kind of like the old TikTok, I guess, but
Hmm.
he did really well on Vine back in the day as well. Just standing in the doorway wearing an Elsa costume. He also ran for president, and I sold some t-shirts to raise money for a little boy with leukemia. And it was like that Obama visual where it said hope, but I changed it to totes, and then, it was the goat. But yeah, he
And
ran for
then
president
who
unsuccessfully.
who wore it?
Yeah, the who wore best I did mostly with like the sheep. That was just a one-time funny, and then people were like, "No, you got to keep doing that." And I was like, "Crap, okay." And that one kind of turned into a job at one point, and we had kids, and time shrinks, and I'm like, "Okay, what do I need to be spending my time on, dressing up a sheep or, furthering some of our other businesses?"
Right. But I'm sure
The
the sheep didn't.
inspiration, it'll hit again. That I'm sure I'll do that dumb stuff again
Yeah.
someday, or my daughter might help me. I don't know, but it's just I never want to be serious, and I've never tried to do the whole influencer social media thing full time because it's a fun creative outlet for me, and I've never wanted it to be this like stressful situation. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's
It
a weird
comes
world.
it comes through. And it's very authentic. And while it
Yeah, and I
does
never
seem
want to be
like you're
like,
obviously setting things up, it's not like you're like, I mean, I don't know. Now that we have all these trends and people doing these certain things at certain times, but
mean, I wouldn't mind if we were sponsored by like Hoskin Water or something like that. Like get some great livestock equipment out of it. No,
Right.
I don't know. I've never looked into doing it as a full-time gig. I like it for what it is right now. I did
Yeah.
do the whole push to get to 10K just because I was so close. And I'm like, God, I feel like I've been on this bubble for so long. And then a few people shared it and
Oh,
hit
you
the
got
mark.
it.
And now I'm like, okay, now what?
Yeah. Right.
Well,
Now
it's
it's
that point.
20. Now you go for
Just to have a
20.
K after the number was the only thing I was really going for.
How long? So the goat was around before the kids?
Oh yeah. He was
Oh,
my first child for sure.
that was a warm up, huh?
Yeah, one of my favorite moments was when we had our son. He was like 5 months old and it was Halloween. And Henry's like, let's put a saddle on Totes and have him ride Totes for the Halloween picture. And that was, oh my God, that was funny. I mean, our son could barely sit up,
Yeah,
and
I was
here we
gonna
are.
say, can they even hold their heads up?
Henry's like holding him and then like letting go for 3 seconds so he can get the picture. And I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna get CPS called us. This kid's gonna fall off the goat onto the concrete tack floor. But we got
Yeah,
the photo. That's all
yeah,
that matters.
yeah. So you're still looking for another, not a replacement, right? Just,
So there will never be another totes. And I did have a mini mule for a while, which was my 30th birthday present.
oh, there you
And
go.
chased ton he chased the goats everywhere to bite him in the butts. So he got sent down the road because he was evil. But he was so cute. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen a mini mule, but they're like the cutest things in the entire world. But he was so mean. Oh
Yeah,
man, he was.
I've heard that about
Yeah,
mini
so ever
everything.
since then we've kind of chilled out on the pet farm animals and
Mhm.
yeah, they
Just
wouldn't be
kids.
doing well right now in Montana anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Now the kids are actually kind of taking over, like working in the barn and working with the sheep and getting hands
Helping
on
with the
and
bums.
Hmm.
shearing and all that. And there's some good footage there and getting some traction off of that.
Yeah.
That people need to learn how to work when they're little, and so you know
Yeah.
all about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I got a kid I'd like to teach how to work. He's 12. He's 12 now. The sheep thing, you were talking about teaching people where your food comes from, but even like with me, who's grown up around livestock and stuff, it's still really interesting to see like when you're lambing, and kind of what you go through and all that. One thing I was going to ask you, th- so a little bit of my sheep knowledge comes from, there's a documentary called Sweetgrass. Have you ever seen that
Yeah.
movie? You've seen
Mhm.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah. And so that really kind of,
Big timber?
yeah, it was filmed in Montana.
right. It was over by Livingston, maybe? I'm trying to,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's Big Timber, Livingston. It's
right.
just west of us. Hard.
Yeah, I knew a guy that was from there. So you're west of Billings,
Yeah,
Molt is?
yeah,
Are you
just
north
west.
of,
Northwest.
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
a little bit.
We're kind of rolling hill country. We got some
Hmm.
rough, but we're kind of rolling hills, and then you can see like 5 different mountain ranges around us.
Hmm. So do your, like in that documentary, the sheep went up into the mountains for the summer. Do you do
Yeah,
anything like that?
we yeah, we truck bands out, starting usually first part of June. All the April lambers, I'll put them in semi-load lots, and so when they get about a month old, they're ready to go on trucks, and about 3 semi-loads to each location.
And the guys from Peru, they go with them.
Yeah, we'll send a guy with each
Couple dogs,
Hmm.
horse or two. Yeah.
full camper type deal, and
We go to about three different locations
yeah,
recently.
3 and sometimes 4 for the fourth one's usually kind of a short-term deal. If somebody wants to try it or something like that.
Hmm.
But those phone calls until the end of May, and they want a summertime weed deal, so you're really you're looking for places to go, but people always seem to call,
Hmm.
and always last minute deal, and
Hmm.
so you got prepared for last minute phone calls because everybody wonders if we got sheep, and I'm always like, I got sheep. I got
You have enough grass for
Yeah.
us.
That always
So,
works out. Huh? So is it they like stay in a sheep wagon for the full
yeah,
summer?
bumper pull weekend hunting type camper,
Mm-hmm.
just a axle bumper pull,
Mm-hmm.
usually like 16-foot bumper pull camper.
Those old school sheep campers are awesome, but they're like expensive. They're hard to find too.
Hmm. Why is that? Just because they've become
They're unique.
campers? Yeah.
Yeah,
People buy them now for Airbnbs.
Airbnb.
Oh,
Stick
yeah.
them out in a pasture and romanticize a sheep wagon.
And so your guys from Peru, they just fly in for the summer?
No, they're on a year-to-year contract, but the sheep herders can stay up to 3 years. So usually at about 2.5 years, I send a couple guys home during the winter. So I kind of only have four guys helping run the feedlot and the bands during the winter months. And then right before lambing, I get
Everyone
my
back.
my all six guys going for
Mm-hmm.
lambing next year. A couple different guys go home to renew their visas and passports, and then they'll come back.
Oh, okay.
So it's just like a 2-year rotation, but we got some turnover with them. But I mean, 4 or 5 of the guys are pretty regular.
Yeah. How long, like, what's the longest one that's been
One
with
guy's
you?
going on 15 years now.
Since I've been there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty cool. So have you ever sent
Long
an,
family, and they'll, I mean, they're very to our hearts, and
mm-hmm.
we cherish them and try to
Mm-hmm.
take care.
One of our guys, who's one of my personal favorite people in the whole wide world, he is in Peru right now, and he's been sending me pictures and videos almost every other day of like where he's going that day, what he's doing, what he's eating, his mom, his sister. It's so cute. And today he sent me that he got his passport, so he's excited to come back soon. And he was just literally videotaping the traffic in the street to send to me. I'm like, thank you, Nilton. See you
Yeah.
soon. Like
Sounds like he
it's
needs an Instagram account.
he
Oh,
does. Oh my God. He does have a Facebook, but yeah, no, he loves taking videos of the sheep and he's just appreciative to work for us and we're very
and
appreciative of it
just
too.
Mm-hmm.
is a diehard. Like you tell him to go get a wrench, and it's at a dead run, and we're like, hey,
You know,
just go
we're
get the
not
wrench,
right now.
like.
Do you have like a bunkhouse or you have housing at the
Yeah,
ranch?
and then we got a old farmhouse at the ranch that they all kind of live in when they're back there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I keep a couple guys there all summer to kind of upkeep and handle the sheep that we leave behind or whatever, because we'll leave a band of sheep there and
Mm-hmm.
send 2 or 3 out, 4 out. And we always got sheep left behind, and then start September, then everything starts coming back. So we start bringing lambs back to the feedlot and bring the ewes back to put out on some fall pasture and stuff. And
Mm-hmm. And
uh,
s- and you were talking about fattening them up. Is it kind of like cattle then? Like you bring them
yeah,
back and you put them in a feedlot and get them fat?
yeah, it's about just a rough estimate, quick numbers. You kind of bring them around 80, 85 pounds. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but whatever. And then they're on feed for 90 to 120 days. The lighter one's probably 120 days, and then the fats start going. But, we're
Mm-hmm.
shipping a load starting usually the 1st of November, we're doing a load a week and then of fats because I also buy another, I don't know, close to 10,000 lambs
Mm-hmm.
on top of what we raise. So I do a lot of buying and shipping. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, the last couple of years, I've been selling to Canada and doing an export and shipping them live to north to Innisfail, north of Calgary.
Okay. Huh. So where
And
do if they get butchered in the US, where do they go?
I send some loads to Brush, Colorado. There's another
Okay.
plant in Dixon, California, and another one in Denver, and then there's a
Mm-hmm.
big one in Wolverine Pack in Chicago,
Yeah.
or
But
close to.
primarily, explain your ethnic,
Um, go.
unless you don't want to.
Well, I heard
Well,
I'll ask you. So I saw something, I think it was just today. They had said at one time, and it wasn't that long ago, that there was like 60 million goat or sheep in the US, and now we're down to 6 million, the size of the herd.
Probably even
Why,
less.
um, can you like why is that? Like why there used to be so much many more sheep in like New Mexico and I'm sure Montana and Wyoming.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, everywhere.
yeah,
Everywhere where they had sheep, it was way more than what they got now. I
right.
mean, but majority of it is what we're dealing with now in the cattle industry is just it's downsizing because of labor and efficiencies.
And
Hmm.
And the sheep industry really has a hard time with imports. We can only produce in the US half of the lamb consumed, and it's probably even less than that with all the ethnic population. And so even if we cut all the imports, we couldn't feed America. And you guys are on your podcast, you're very political and stuff. And why is it that I got to sell to an export when we import over half of our lamb? It
Right.
just makes no sense.
Yeah.
But our competition in dealing with these bigger packers and stuff and the competition in between them, we just can't create that boost. And then we always got these imports that the packers are complaining that they're competing against to sell the meat because they can produce it so much cheaper. And what we deal with all the time that we watch all the time is the trade in the dollar. And that's with me with Canada and us with New Zealand and Australia. When our dollar's strong, they'll undercut our prices terrible to import it because they want that dollar of ours.
Hmm.
And so it's just the transition of political stuff is why we've lost it. Now we're even losing it. Even you watch now the numbers coming into the next year with the cattle prices the way they are, how many less sheep. We were actually building some numbers over the last 5 years, but now that the cattle have transitioned, why wouldn't you sell them and get some cattle?
Hmm. Yeah.
And you hear it all the time that the ranches were bought and paid for by sheep.
Right.
And a lot of that goes to um, percentages of lambing. Like most of the time, if you're range lambing, you're at 100% usually or 90%. And if you shed lamb and all that, you kind of get up around 120, 140. An all confinement deal, you're up around 160, 170% lamb crop. Well, apples to apples, you can run so many ewes for one cow, but you're dealing with that 120 to 160% lamb crop that helps offset that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's why sheep should be appealing to more people, but it is easier to run a cow than a bunch of sheep.
Yeah. And now that there's so few, there's so low numbers, kids aren't growing up like, now kids grow up and they want to run cattle because it's what
Yeah,
they grow up with. When, generations ago they grew up on sheep ranches.
yeah. And now, I see a big deal with young people getting into the goats, which is great because in all the enterprises that we do, the goats have the biggest margin.
Hmm.
And I'm always about return on investment. And the
Right.
goats do everything two times.
that's in Montana.
And that's just
How much better they would be somewhere else.
and that's just what I do.
Uh-huh.
But in doing the numbers, but I can't ever get the numbers that you need to really do a lot of numbers, I guess, because there's not
Hmm.
a lot of goats. But
Yeah.
like right, you're looking at $4 and $5 a pound for these goats,
Hmm.
60-pound goat.
And so that we get in the ethnic market like that is because of the where is it like Mexico
No, it's
that eats a lot of
it.
gold?
Well, Mexicans, yeah, eat a lot of it, but it's all the Middle Easterners,
Mm-hmm.
from Chicago up into New York, like in a week. But from the time they leave my place, could be in the Bronx in New York, killing them on the streets
Yeah.
for different families that come pick them out
Hmm.
within a week.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And I don't even like I send so on the average, I bet we're pretty close to a load a week going to either the West Coast or the East Coast. And some half of the year, I bet we send a load each way every week.
Yeah.
And COVID really played a big role in finding ethnic markets because when everybody was at stay at home, the ethnic families were very ritual in staying home and cooking. They actually knew the way a family should stay home and cook.
Right.
Us Americans that just go out and get McDonald's or go to a
Mhm.
restaurant. The ethnic population knew that home base.
Yeah.
And so during COVID, the market dropped drastically, but then it just shot up within 30 days of
Hmm.
people realizing that, we do stay at home and we do have cash saved aside to go buy us a whole goat or a whole sheep, and our family's gonna eat it for a week,
Yeah.
you know, little in the way of
They also don't freeze meat, so
it's
it's a
all
fresh
fresh.
market.
And
Hmm.
so the whole goat and sheep deal, like once you get started with them, they expect another semi load coming the next week because it's not frozen. And the conventional way of raising fat lambs and stuff, going to the big packers and stuff, they freeze all their stuff. And those ethnics don't necessarily like the frozen stuff or going through Walmart or that. They're going to go to a local meat market that killed it that week.
So the
And so
goats
that,
will go to meat markets and they'll butcher them
yeah,
there.
In the
and,
light
and
lambs.
the light lambs. I mean, and that's what's kept us alive in the sheep industry is because we'll kill, when you're shipping goats and the demand starts getting real high on goats, then here you come seeing these light lambs bringing $3 a pound because the light lamb carcass is the same size as a goat carcass. And so those two kind of go with each other as the market's climbing. And what happens there is you take a 60, 70 pound lamb and you kill it that at that weight and you don't take it to 140 pounds. You just took half the meat off the market by killing him
Right.
early. So it'd just be like us taking our cattle and we'd kill them at 600 pounds and we don't take them to 12, 1400 pounds.
Right.
Well, you don't get a chance at that because you already killed them.
Hmm. Huh. Have you ever been to one of them meat markets?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I just went to one last December in California.
So like how many are they doing a day? Like,
Well, like a lot of the places I go, like from Chicago East, a lot of them are 200 to 250 a week.
okay.
So that's
Yeah.
kind of like a third of a load. And so, like when we go east, we'll start our drops in Chicago, and then by the time they get to the East Coast, the truck's empty.
And so it's you probably usually ran by someone of Middle Eastern, like, or is it like a USDA inspected, like what we think of as a meat locker?
It's both. It's both. She's shaking her head, but it's so half of my customers are another trader that's going to disperse them out into his community or whatever, and got probably those ones are probably killed on the street. And then the other half of my customers, I'm going straight to a USDA
Yeah.
plant that will then go to a meat market.
So killed on the street, you mean people are butchering them in their garage? Is that what you mean? Because I've seen
Yeah,
that before.
or they'll take like a trailer load and then a flatbed, and then they'll have a bunch of hooks hanging off the flatbed. So the family goes and picks out their sheep and they kill it right there and they hang it up on the hooks on the flatbed and they dress it there themselves.
Hmm.
And I've heard of this. I haven't actually seen it, but
Yeah.
then that family butchers it all themselves and puts it in a bag and takes it home and it's fresh. And they got to pick it out themselves.
Yeah. My wife is Greek, or she's half Greek. Her dad is Greek, grew up with a mom. His mom came from Greece. And so he talks about the parties when he was a kid, and they would have a party and they would all stab the goat or the sheep, and whoever killed it, whoever stabbed it and killed it is like gets the prize. Like, and that was the Greek neighborhood party when he
Uh,
was a kid.
Well, it
But
just shows you too how far removed Americans are from their food supply. Is that what we just spoke of is so culturally normal
Mm-hmm.
to basically everyone but white people at
Right.
this point. And so it's like shocking to us even sometimes to see it, but then we're like, it's one of the most like normal, natural ways of life,
Yeah.
and
There's two things. Like I understand the borders and letting them in and this and that, and we're overpopulated with ethnics. But if they're going to be here, I want to be the one feeding them.
Right.
Be realistic. But on the other hand, those people value religion and they value their money and they value their food.
Mm-hmm.
And they go a long ways on that we've lost as Americans.
Right. Yeah,
You
and
know,
just like you saying that, like me thinking of those that like Greek neighborhood and kind of, his mom, like you talk about his mom who came from Greece. You just named the three things that like she would value. That I was able to get to know her a little bit, but
and there's
yeah,
good
it's
people and bad people all the time, but when
yeah,
you get it, I value some of these ethnics because there's a lot of good ones, and we're going through time in this country where there's a little bit of uproar on, whether we should keep some of them or getting rid of some of them and all that, but when you look at their values, it might not be your same values as you do, but they have some values with them that they're living by. And I
right.
think there's something to be learned by that.
Yeah. And you talk about being shocked when you really think about it, like to them it's probably like what makes more sense, like being shocked that your food's getting killed or I mean it almost makes more sense how they operate than
oh
us
yeah.
eating all this food and having no idea what it looks like to actually harvest it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and to get right down to it, we haven't starved to death, or we
Yeah,
haven't starved.
right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they
Or had
came
to
over
work
here,
incredibly hard to
they came
get a
over
meal.
here with nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I
That's
guess with that we could get right into the meat sales. um You how long you been doing it?
So 2015, I had been on the ranch for probably 2 years, and I kind of was trying to find my place. I had a job in town, I was driving to every day, and I'm like, God, I don't want to drive to town every gosh darn day. Like, this is crazy. And so I was trying to think of something that I could do that was involved at the ranch, but like kind of my own thing. And in California, there was a rancher that I knew that had started this business where he was selling beef, pork, and lamb, like these combination boxes. And, nothing new and grand, but it was kind of new for the area of the Billings area. So I started going to some like local food meetings, anything that I could find. There wasn't a lot, and just talking with people like, hey, is anyone interested in knowing where their food's coming from? This was 10 years ago, and in California, you'd go to a restaurant, every ingredient was listed where it was sourced from. Billings, Montana, not a single thing. And if there
Hmm.
was a restaurant doing it, nobody cared. It just
Right.
wasn't trendy really even all. So it's kind of on the before the cusp of trends of local food. And there was a group of like-minded producers that kind of had been selling direct to, neighbors or one restaurant here and there, but it just wasn't really a thing in the area yet. There was one processor in the Billings area that was doing a great job, and I kind of asked them, how does this work? I mean, I knew nothing, and at the time, it wasn't readily available on the internet to search how do you sell meat directly. So it was a trial by error, and I was at a women agricultural conference, and a chef came to speak, and this older woman in the front of the room raised her hand. She's like, "Why don't you buy products from us?" And he's like, "Have you ever come to my restaurant and offered to sell me your products?" And it was like this moment of clarity for everyone. Like, we can't expect restaurants to do all the work for us. So that week I went home, I talked to Henry about it. He was like, "Sounds good, go for it." And I was like, "Okay, now I got to do it." Talked to a local processor. I went into that restaurant, into that chef's restaurant, and I said, "Hey, you said if we came by here and asked you if you wanted to buy our stuff, you would." And he's like, "Yeah, bring me a whole lamb next week." And I walked out, I was thinking, okay, this is so easy. Everyone's gonna want a whole lamb now. Well, not so much, but I do thank him. He was pivotal in the starting of that business, and he gave me a chance. And so I got whole lambs to that restaurant every week and tried going to other restaurants, shortly realized that not everyone is a big lamb lover. So that's where we kind of started bringing in the beef, and then our neighbors had some pork, so I started buying their pigs and getting them butchered. And I found a couple freezers off of Craigslist, some used ones. You don't have to buy everything new, people. And in the state of Montana, if you start a business like this, you have to get a meat depot license, and your meat that you're selling cannot be in the same vicinity as your personal food or meat, and or even like on a structure of a home. So my in-laws had a detached garage in Billings, Montana, and I said, hey guys, starting this little meat business. Can I use that part of your garage that you have some stored mattresses in? And his parents were very supportive, and I put 3 freezers in there and kind of started from there. And like I said, a big trial by error. I figured if I could do one beef, a few lambs, a couple hogs, and rotate it out, I could kind of keep that rotation going. And then things kind of started snowballing to where Henry would be like, hey, I've got 20 fat lambs this week. And I'm like, if I get 20 fat lambs processed, I don't know where to put them all. So I started looking around at some cold storage and found one in Billings, Montana, that I would like to say I've given them a lot of business, because ever since I started that business, everyone's like, where do you store your meat? Because that's one of the biggest hangups for a lot of people. And they still grandfathered me in. I don't even know what they charge people for pallet anymore, but it was $25 a pallet, and you could put as much on there as you could fit in the area. And that was my next growth pillar, was starting to store my meat in the commercial locker. And it quickly became a full-time job, to say the least. As far as the work goes, I don't know if the profit was quite there yet, but I was working with a number of processors. This was also at a time where getting animals into the processor, like a lot of people know, it's always been a wait list for us in Montana. It's never been a, hey, can I get something in next week? It's always been months out. So that was one of the biggest challenges I had, was trying to forecast processing dates and things like that. From that, I started meeting a lot of other producers in the area that were kind of having similar struggles of marketing, finding customers, meeting a customer that maybe wants to try it but wants more of what you have, or wanted to try another protein that you didn't have. So about 10 other local producers, mostly meat producers, and myself, founded a co-op in Billings. It's known as the Yellowstone Valley Food Hub now. It's still going. And that was a big pivotal moment, because it gave me the chance to kind of offload a lot of the work that I was doing onto the hub. They kind of sold things as a group of producers. And then we were able to source vegetables and things like that into some wholesale markets. And they're primarily a direct to consumer online order pickup once a week. But it's been great because I just have a freezer full of my product. The inventory is sold weekly and it's shipped out weekly there. So that's been a good option to have for sure. And I always encourage people to look for a food hub or a co-op that they could possibly join to sell their product through. And that's kind of where we're at currently. I don't do farmers markets anymore. I put my time in there. I did them for about 7 years. I loved them, but I also hated them at the same time. They were great once I was there. I loved talking with customers. I loved putting myself out there. But the time it takes to get ready for them, to make sure you have the right product, to get your butt there at 4 o'clock in the morning every week, it's draining. But at the same time, I do believe if someone is starting to get in this business, you're putting yourself right in front of the people that want to buy your products. So they're great to participate in if you can have access to those. But yeah, mostly now, we did buy the processor in 2020. It's called Cowboy Meats. That's kind of pivoted a lot of our meat sales that direction. We do a lot of custom cut and wrap for people. we've tried our hand at scaling it, but kind of dialed that back a little bit just because the biggest thing that I tell people will kill you in this business is your inventory. If you're just sitting on a ton of inventory, it's just cash that you do not have flowing, and that will really hinder you. Especially if someone comes knocking on your door looking for a cut that you put into a different cut, and you're like, shoot. So the inventory control is probably one of the hardest, I would say, challenges in this industry. And I never tell anyone don't do it, but there are a handful of things that I would really forewarn people to take into consideration if you are considering to selling your meat directly. In 2020, when COVID happened, right around when we bought Cowboy, everyone was wondering how can they sell their meat because everyone was going to the grocery store, can't find meat on the shelves, or it's insanely expensive. And, all the ranchers were getting calls from people saying, hey, do you have any meat available? And from that, people knew I was selling meat directly for a few years at that point and were like, hey, how did you do this? How did you start? What do I need to do? And I remember telling Henry, like, my God, I'm getting a lot of questions. I feel like I should do a webinar to like tell everybody at once instead of, reaching out to everybody one-on-one. So I did a 6-course webinar. Henry was on one about knowing your numbers, one was about processing, one was about marketing, one's about shipping, which I'm still not a huge proponent of, and licensing, things like that. And it was done in 2020, but all the information is still very relevant and valuable if you are starting to look into this business. I did make a code for your listeners that they can download it for free off of our website.
Oh, cool.
With the code Lonesome. I set that up so if people are interested.
So go
in
to
it.
your website, click on the webinar, and if there's a place for a code there, and if they just
Yep,
type
go
in
to
Lonesome.
on arrowconsulting.com, our consulting website. I was selling it for $50, but Arrow Consulting MT. Thank you, Mr. Tech guy. But yeah, I think it's still relevant, and if people are halfway interested in, they can take a look and see what I looked like 5 years ago, which fabulous. Just kidding.
Well,
But yeah, that was interesting because I thought 10 people would sign up, right? And I'm thinking, but I thought that would be valuable. I was just at this point where I was constantly answering the same questions to people that I just wanted to put it all in one space to answer all the questions at once. And the people who watched live could hang on afterwards and ask more direct questions if they had them. And I think I sold over 100 of them at the time. And since then, I still get purchases a few times a month, even of people still in it. So I've thought about doing an updated course, but just haven't gotten there yet. But at this point, High Five Meats is strictly a wholesale business, which is where it was the big dream, selling to a few customers, but in large quantities, primarily to a grocery store in Bozeman, and then some restaurants in the Billings area. And it's been consistent. I get the whole carcasses gone, and that's where I wanted to be. I would say that's the goal right off the bat because it's such less stress. But like Henry said, you have to be able to scale to what those customers need. And a lot of times, 1 to 2 carcasses is not going to cut it. So,
and that's what's so difficult about beef that people need to understand is there's, you can make probably 40 different cuts out of a beef, and versus a lamb. I'm not trying to tell you to sell lamb, but lamb, there's like 6 different cuts, and it's carcass is a carcass, but beef, we just got so much more. And what we realized when we were doing it is we'd cut it one way because a restaurant would tell us, hey, we want it this way. We want it cut this way. And so we'd start cutting it this way. Then you go to the next restaurant. Well, we sell it this way. It's the same piece of meat, but it's cut different. And so you're going to deal with that. And you got to either put your foot down, or when you're trying to grow and get customers, then you're always changing. And that was what was real hard with the packing plant, is we'd tell my brother, hey, we need them cut this way. And then the next week he'd get all his guys trained up to cut them that way. And then the next week we had to come with different cutting instructions. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't preparatory every week, the same deal.
Yeah.
And then you're throwing some roasts into ground and saving them and back and forth. And it was a nightmare.
Yeah. But you bought it, you said in 2020. So is this was after like the COVID freak
It
out?
was right in the middle.
Right in the middle of it.
So
Like,
as it was
it
happening, you
was 6 months into like COVID kind of hit in January, about this time, we were starting to get, and I think we bought it in June.
June, July.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In July, we closed on it.
We're crazy.
So yeah.
And we had a bunch of cattle, to be quite honest with you, we were driving home from Arizona and I had 2,200 fats down in Nebraska on feed and I didn't know what I was going to do.
Right.
And we still had fats up in Montana too.
Mm-hmm.
We were, oh my gosh, I told Sarah on the way home, we drove all night going home, just stressed about it. I'm like, well, I guess we'll lose our money and we got the whole lives ahead of us to pay it back.
Right.
Just like crazy.
Good.
I
Yeah.
sold fats for 80 cents.
Oh, really? Then?
And I needed 95 cents break even to get out of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of when I got my ball rolling on this deal, is I was talking a lot about that back then. And even now, like that just kind of boils my blood a little bit, that because you know what they were getting out of them at the time too.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Well, it wasn't on the shelves. Like,
yeah. Right. Yeah. So, but you've talked about, I found it interesting. You talked about like those regulations where your meat has to be away from everything else. That's different than a lot of states.
Yeah, and that was a big thing that people didn't know. But I even had a guy from the state on the podcast, or on the webinar, giving information on what to do. And at the time, it's still you cannot get concrete answers from people. It's like they want to wait until you get in the business and then come tell you you're doing it wrong. Instead of just out the gate, this is exactly
Right.
what you do. It's crazy, but also believable, you
Yeah.
know? So yeah, I was shocked that I actually got him on the webinar because I always think that government wants to shy away from any of that, but he came on and said what you needed to do. Of course, that was for the state of Montana and
Right.
every
Are you,
little.
is your plant USDA inspected, or it's just,
We are now. That was a thing.
you want to talk about boil your blood.
That'd be
yeah.
another hour-long
I've
podcast.
talked to other people, and I mean, we actually, I got out of college in like '05, and around then we did farmers markets and we shipped beef and we did kind of the direct marketing back then. And then COVID hit and I was like, yeah, we were 15 years too early. But I mean, I think we maybe lasted like 4 years. Like you talk about the farmers market thing, and I understand, you know, and but it was good to know. And now they're starting back up again. My brother is, and I have a nephew that's working on it too. But things are so much different now. And one thing I thought would be interesting, or people might be interested, as far as like you said, you train these people that want to sell, but I think people who want to buy also need almost like what you have to go through and what you deal with, as far as like, is there some things you would like the customer to know?
Well, I used to get really frustrated at dumb questions. And like just straight out the gates, people would walk up to and be like, is your meat full of antibiotics? Or does your cows eat corn? Because I'm allergic to corn. If your cow ate corn, then I can't have your meat. And just stuff like that all the time. And I finally got to the point that I was like, they're just using whatever buzzwords they've heard to interact with you in some way. So it's not even
Right.
something that they might even be passionate about. It's just their way to like start the conversation. So instead of, I would immediately get on the defense and like turn red and start boiling. But then I took a step back and I'm like, Sarah, they don't know. They are completely uneducated on the food system, on how this works. So I would just take a giant deep breath and start from the beginning. And I would just explain how our animals were raised. I'm not going to try and sell you something you don't want or you're convinced you don't need. I just put forth how our animals were fed, how our animals was raised. And by the end of the conversation, that's all they wanted. They just wanted the connection with the rancher.
Hmm.
It didn't even down to whatever question they asked me to start out with. So I always would tell people, like, don't take offense exactly to the dumb questions right away. It might just be the first time they've ever spoken to a farmer or rancher, and they're just trying to find that connection to their food. So that was huge. I'd come home from farmers markets fuming to Henry, like, you are not going to believe what this person asked me. But it was like a year into it before I was like, these people just don't know and they need to be taught.
Hmm.
It's
Right.
a big educational thing, and it's your opportunity to make people learn and understand that,
Yeah.
why antibiotics are used and withdrawal times and all those things. Whatever you feel passionate about telling people, just tell them because it's information that they've probably never even heard before, but they're totally willing to hear you out.
Yeah.
Nine
Yeah.
times out of 10.
And it's interesting too, like that you wanted to share your information. A lot of people get into business and they're like, I don't care if anybody, most they don't want competition. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or other people getting involved. But I feel like at this point, um, the more people involved, the better. And it
It's
seems like you're
like I always thought of it like it's us ranchers, small guys against the big processor.
hmm
It's not us little guys against each other. We're all in this
right,
together because if if Sally Joe from Tampa, Florida finds a local producer, whether it's in her area or a small producer online, if she has a bad experience with them, the rest of us are all screwed
right,
because she's not going to do it again. She's going to go back to the grocery store.
yeah,
So my biggest thing was hearing about all these small operators that wanted to get into it, having no idea what they were doing. And my biggest thing was the break even. Nobody knew their numbers. Nobody was weighing their meat. Nobody was figuring out how much it costs to feed the steer to get him that fat. Like my biggest thing that I tell people too is pay the ranch for the animals, or at least keep it well documented so you know what you're actually making on these animals. And a lot of the times people have no idea. And they have
yeah,
no idea that a carcass weight is a certain percentage of the live weight, and then the meat you get back is even a crazy smaller amount. And so that was the biggest class or webinars was with Henry, is he's Mr. Numbers guy, Excel spreadsheet guy, and he really breaks it down to the percentage, to the dollar, to your break even, and the things that you have to take into account when you get into that business. Just like ranching too, knowing all your numbers. A lot of people don't.
right, yeah. And then they're not able to buy packing plants and start consulting business. If you know your
Well,
numbers, you
the
can.
consulting business, Henry's like, gosh, I feel like I need to buy $100,000 building or something. There's no overhead with this one. I'm like, that's a good thing. We can start a business with no overhead. It is a thing.
You can find something, I'm sure.
But I would just like to add about the meat process or the getting in the meat business is there's I feel like different levels that people could get into it too if they're wanting to see if it's something they want to do instead of taking 50 fats to the processor and then having a ton of inventory that you have no idea how to get rid of. Like, start just selling halves and wholes. Like,
Yeah.
that's going to be the easiest, most simple way to get into this business because you're
Mhm.
putting a lot of the work on the processor and making the customer, do all the cuts with the processor, pay the processor for their processing fees, and you sell that animal on the rail. So, like, honestly, that would be the easiest, quickest way to get into it. And then you're not taking a single product home, you're not storing a single product. It's all wham bam done at the processor. And I consider that like the side hustle if you wanted to start that type of business. Anything else than that, it's going to be a full-time gig that you better be prepared to work your butt off for because this meat's not going to sell itself. You have to sell it and it takes a lot of time and effort to do it.
Yeah. So what are you consulting people?
We have just three quick case studies, I call them, of what we've been up to.
The Arrow Consulting is we found a need to try to preserve this younger generation and trying to keep them into agriculture. And we know it as a agriculture industry that we're losing the younger generation to, to other jobs, I guess. And so we've been really passionate about trying to speak to younger farmers and ranchers and figuring out ways, not just speaking to them, say, hey, let's do this, but actually figuring out ways that they can do it and thinking outside the box and stuff. And so we just got started at the end of last year, right? We launched it about November, September.
Yeah.
And so we're just kind of getting started, but kind of some different scenarios that we've come across is doing a 1-day ranch tour, having lunch, tour all your stuff, have lunch, have a quick day, give you our ins and outs real quick. The next step is if you want to go further is, actually looking into your numbers and figuring out your different enterprises and which ones are making money and which ones ain't. And then another scenario is I see like in Montana, we're dealing with huge increases in land, values of land, and tying this old money to young ranchers and farmers, where this old money comes in and buys the ranch because they want to invest in some land. And the ranch manager that's been there has worked for a 70-year-old grandpa, for 20, 30 years that he's been on the ranch. And so now he's scared to death of having this new landowner come in and us being the in-between person to help this manager that's been on there for 30 years doing some projects and stuff and explaining it to this guy that just invested in this ranch that just wanted to invest in it but doesn't really know anything, and trying to tie those two together and making it as successful as we possibly can.
Yeah. So your goal really is to help people be successful in agriculture
in
altogether.
agriculture and
Yeah.
trying to keep it in production.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever somebody invests in a land, they invest in scenery and hunting and want to do some stuff like that. That's fine, but you still got a lot of production there that we need to capitalize on to get you some return on investment.
Right. And so who do you see as like your primary customer?
Well, I had silent owners,
Okay.
just silent money that comes and buys these ranches and they want to do 2 weeks of hunting and bring their employees or because obviously they made their money from somewhere or they inherited it and they got to get it put somewhere, especially where we're dealing with stock markets going up and down. I think it's going to be more and more all the time, but we're not making more agricultural land.
Right.
So we got to try to preserve what we got. And
Mhm.
that's where we're passionate with this Arrow Consulting is trying to tie the two together. The silent money can buy the ranch in confidence that the ranch can still be moving and they don't have to go work the ranch.
Right.
But be confident in having this younger generation be there to make the improvements and keep going with it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of lost communication in between there.
Right.
For one, the guy that'd been on the ranch, he's like, well, this guy ain't gonna know nothing. No, he's not. So let's try to solve the problem. We know what the problem is, that you guys aren't gonna be able to communicate. But if we can send him some pictures of gathering cattle on his ranch and doing the shipping and doing that and working with this ranch manager that does know everything and help tie the two together and everybody's happy and we can go on with production.
And knowing where you guys are, we got to bring up Yellowstone, right? This, and I've talked to people in that neighborhood, and how it has just exploded. How far are you from Bozeman?
2 hours.
Yeah. And so that's kind of been the mecca that has kind of exploded real estate wise.
Insane. It is
Yeah.
completely insane.
But
And
as you
so-
know, we're dealing with an older generation. I mean, even my dad at 65, 67, and all these, you and I are probably pretty close, same age, and this next generation that's older, they've never been worth as much as they are now.
Right.
But they really aren't worth nothing until they sell it. So if they sell it, we got to capitalize on it.
Right.
And if you don't, we got to keep it going. So
Yeah.
there's a double-edged sword there where you're going to want to cut the pie.
Yeah. That's in and just thinking about where you are, how you probably just saw that and thought about what you could do
Yeah, and I
to
just
be
see it,
involved.
but we get people we speak at a young couples deal all the time, and we're just, we've been through the ranch for profit a couple times, and so we kind of see the outside, world looking in a little bit, but I'm not saying that we know everything, but we're willing to help people
Great.
and have outside mind looking in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. That's great to hear. That's really cool. I was like excited to have you on, and now that you've been on, I'm even more like you have even better stuff to talk about. But yeah, it's all that's what I feel like in the next 10 years, doing stuff like what you're doing, succession planning, that kind of stuff. It's all becoming a very serious issue, I guess, for people if we want to kind of maintain agriculture in this country. So right on. So how can they get how do they find that one? That's Arrow Consulting MT.
That's arrowconsultingmt.com. Yep. And then that direct marketing course is free with the Lonesome, just one word, Lonesome discount code. You can find me on Instagram, Sarah Sheep Lady. I'm always there.
When's Henry? Does Henry have an account?
He
When's
doesn't, and the minute he does, I'm gone. If he sees what I'm up to, it's
Oh,
over.
that's why you don't want to.
I always ask her, I'm like, how do you get this?
He's like, I think I'm getting Instagram. His Facebook got hacked and has since gone away. I tried to get him a new one for Christmas, but he had too many friend requests at once, so that one went away. And so I've given up trying to get him back a Facebook. So he's like, maybe you should join Instagram. And I'm like, I'll try Facebook again.
That's like my daughter. I have a 14-year-old daughter or 15 now. And I tell her like I need to start promoting my stuff on TikTok. Nope, you're not getting a TikTok.
Get out of here, Dad.
And right before they got rid of it, I heard
Yeah.
if you got on, you'd still be able to have it. So I was like, I just went ahead and made one, and she blocked me instantly.
Oh my God.
But her mother's able
Oh,
to see it, so I'm not too worried, I guess.
yeah, that's hilarious.
But yeah. So the Arrow Consult, anything else? Like any other way to get a hold of you if people want to get a hold of you or anything else you wanted to
All of
throw
our
out there?
contact stuff's on the Arrow Consulting website,
I'll put
and
a link to that in the
yeah,
description. Make it
do.
easy.
Yeah, we really appreciate you reaching out to us, and
We like listening to you,
yeah, we like listen. I got lots of comments for you all the time, but
talking to himself.
yeah, I'm talking to myself.
Well, feel
He's
free to.
recently just gotten into podcasts, so
Oh,
it's
Yeah,
great.
okay.
He,
Well,
I
good.
listened to it
Had you been on one
morning.
before? Is this the
Oh,
first one?
I've been on a few.
Yeah. I was gonna say you're so entertaining. I can't imagine people not.
I went on it was a few years ago. I felt like I was on one quite often. Now I'm like, nobody wants to listen to me talking where I've said the same things over and over again. But no, they're good. We appreciate it.
Well, good. I appreciate you coming on, taking the time. I know you're way busier than I even knew you were, so I really appreciate it. And
don't be afraid to reach out to us.
yeah, yeah, we'll be in touch.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
thank you. Take care.
I miss totes.